Greg Sankey, I hope you're doing well. Welcome into the game here in Tuscaloosa.
Thank you. I am doing well. It's good to have you here. A little bit different venue, but all good nonetheless.
All right, so maybe your thoughts. 2 days in, 2 days left in Atlanta, the transition. We're trying to get used to saying, because Hoover's always been that trend. You know, it's wait till we get to Hoover, wait till we get to Hoover, and now it's wait till we get to Atlanta.
Yeah, and then we want to try to get back to Atlanta, right? So now we've got bookend themes for the football season. This is our third day. So we had a Summer Fest, as we called it. Regions Bank sponsored that. We had about 5,000 fans join us for SEC Nation. We had the new Monday Night Football crew with SEC Nation alum Joe Tessitore, LSU alum Booger McFarland, and Tennessee alum Jason Witten, who are launching into this new booth. And that was one of the ideas with the move, that we could create something special. Centennial Park was great for that. We're now into 2 days. I think the Hall of Fame is a great asset to access, the football field, the reception we had there last evening. We have a reception tonight in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the venue of our championship game. And those are some things that are just unique to Atlanta that help make this event even more special than perhaps it's been over the last few years.
When you talk about the pressing storylines around your kind of travel, and you know, we always kind of wonder what's on the commissioner's mind. What is some of those pressing things, the message that you want to get out?
When I spoke Monday, the two main themes that I built upon, one, there is change happening around us at a more rapid pace than I believe we've seen, whether that's the media, and these are the things that attach to it, sports gambling, the questions about football scheduling and why and what's the direction nationally. That informs a little bit about the playoff. I always think it's important to talk about who we are, our people, our history, and we did some of that. When I look big picture, you know, the sports gambling issues, one, our relationships with CBS, with ESPN, continuing to see the SEC network built, setting goals around those relationships, litigation around college athletics, the health of football as a sport. Those are big issues that every day demand some level of attention.
I'd love to get your thoughts, and I understand I'm sure you're aware because it came from SEC spring meetings. We were there live on site. We covered it for several days. The new tax bill that doesn't allow some of the exemptions, we talk about donations. We look at Alabama. I know we've talked to Greg Byrne about this. Is that something that you guys are looking at and trying? Because we don't really know until we travel through 1 year how much people are going to make as far as contribution because they're no longer deductible.
Up front, there were estimates. And keep in mind, there are a lot of changes that affected our universities in the tax bill that was adopted in December by Congress. Some of those initial ideas were eventually changed. Some of the taxation on graduate students, remitted tuition, those were really healthy changes. Some of the things that weren't changed, the excise tax on highly paid employees, particularly coaches' salaries, are included in that. And then the loss of seat or access to seat purchase-related donations. We then had projections, so it's easy to project the 21% excise tax on coaches' salaries or highly paid salaries above $1 million. What we don't know as well is the outcome of the removal of that tax deduction. Now, the personal deduction increased. So how does that shape thinking? Does it shape thinking at all? Were the people using some of that tax benefit already capping out, so it's a non-event? Those are the elements that we don't exactly know. Some of our universities have run projections, and those vary significantly from a few $100,000 to millions. Or all of our schools are attentive to that. To your point, we'll have to go through a cycle and see what happens, and then Congress will have to make some determinations about whether that's a priority to continue or not.
There's another big topic of conversation when you look at that game in November, and I cover SEC football for a living. I mean, I talk football every day, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. I hear a lot of national criticism, and the perception is that game right there in November that we go kind of non-conference. Is that a discussion that you're looking at, and maybe because if that game was in September, it never made notice.
Right.
But it is in November. And I hear the
We
criticism.
When Jeff Long was the athletic director in Arkansas and chaired the playoff committee, he raised that issue with his colleagues to say, just structurally, you need to think about when you play that game in September, there's no college football playoff selection committee meeting every week. When it falls in November, when you play that game, there's a meeting the next week. And as you're compared on your schedule to other teams under consideration, and you've played perhaps that weaker opponent, that becomes more of an issue, particularly at that point in the year. Now, the good news is the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has done very well at analyzing a team's full season. So if you played a team in September or November, theoretically it shouldn't matter. I think practically it can. We play 8 games in the conference schedule. We mandate a 9th game. The Alabama game with Louisville this year, the Auburn game with Washington are outcomes of that. Should we be thinking about more? Georgia played 10 last year with Georgia Tech in the Notre Dame game. Florida played Michigan and Florida State. When you look at the semifinalists the last 3 years, 3 of the 4 in each of the last 3 years have played 10 games against Autonomy 5 opponents. That's a bit of a learning moment. On the other side, we play a uniquely rigorous schedule in the SEC. We've had 5 different teams over the last 12 years playing national championship games. 4 teams have won national championships. The next closest conference is 2 with a number of playing in and or winning. And I think that's representative of the rigor of our schedule, which we've relied upon in a big picture. We need to keep that rigor, but we also need to be thinking about strategies to ensure that when the College Football Playoff Selection Committee meets, they say that's a quality schedule, which proves a quality team. And that's why we ought to be talking a bit about the nature of those next to last week games and whether they should exist or where they might be placed otherwise.
Could you see in the near future going to 9 conference games?
It's not really on the agenda. Every year we go through a review. In 2014, after expansion, the conference went through a year-long analysis of every possible scheduling model and was in agreement, significant agreement, that this current model of 8 games is the right one. That's been the continuing clear message. Would that ever change? You can never say never, but it's not something that I think we're poised to do anytime soon. Now, keep in mind, those who say we should play 9 games do play 9 games, and they have the reasons for doing that. For instance, the Big 12, to have a conference championship game, has to play a full round robin among its 10 teams, which produces 9 games. So it becomes easy to say everyone should play the same number of games in that setting. Others have made their 9-game decision for their own reasons that they can explain, and we've made our decision for 8. Again, the message from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is we're responsible to look at your entire schedule, not the number of conference games you play.
Let me switch sports just a little bit. Pretty happy with the success in basketball and obviously making some big strides in the right direction.
You know, the conference had never had more than half of its membership despite its size in the NCAA tournament. And so to have 8 was a great moment, particularly given that 2 years ago we had 3. So the hires of Avery Johnson, Rick Barnes, it paid dividends. Frank Martin's run, Mike White at Florida. Those are good things, and there are more. But there's some. Conzo Martin, a year in, makes an NCAA tournament run. We had the resources. We've had commitment. It was getting the right, I think, personalities and combining all of that. New arenas in a couple of our campuses, refurbished arenas in a couple more, practice facilities all around. Our fans want that success. And we're an all-sports conference, and our fans turn out when we're successful. So really encouraged by what's there in basketball, and even more encouraged about the coming season.
A question that comes up, and I even promised my audience that I would bring it up. When you look at baseball and scholarships, you know where I'm going, 11.7. Is there any discussion to equal that a little bit? I mean, because you see some schools that offer state-supported scholarships, and you look at teams that may have a little unfair advantage, but then you look at Auburn's success, and that kind of counters some of the argument. But we've talked about the 11.7. Is there any discussion where you could kind of equal the playing field a little bit?
There are a couple issues in there. So the state supported lottery scholarships that they have, the Hope Scholarship in Georgia, Bright Futures, Palmetto Scholarships in other states. Don't exist in the states of Mississippi and Alabama. And what's interesting is you can't reduce success or the lack thereof just to that element. Because what I found is institutional aid and more flexibility the NCAA permits around earning and awarding that institutional aid fills in some other holes. So you have Mississippi State, who goes to the College World Series, Ole Miss, who wins the SEC championship this year without those scholarships. So that's one reality. The other reality is the 11.7 number, which just seems intuitively not to make a lot of sense, given you've got a 35-man roster size. And it's a historical number that people don't come off. I don't think you'd pick it now if you said, just blank sheet of paper, how many scholarships do we need? But it's one that we have. I have talked about it. You saw Rob Manfred, the Major League Baseball commissioner, during the College World Series, talking about his learning and understanding of how well we in college baseball develop young people educationally and physically. They learn nutrition, emotionally supported, doing great things in college baseball. And Major League Baseball is taking notice. I welcome the conversation, quite frankly, of updating the scholarship dynamic. But I also know that you don't do that just in baseball without having to look at other sports, particularly on the women's side. And we've had great success in softball. So one of the examples of change we've initiated is baseball and softball coaching numbers, moving a volunteer coach into a full-time role. That's a legislative initiative this year under consideration, but we've done that in tandem with both baseball and softball because we think that's a need for both sports.
It's a discussion that we have quite often in Tuscaloosa. Yeah, I'm sure you do. So
you know why it's 11.7?
I have no clue.
It used to be 13. So going back to the early 70s, the number 13, and I can't explain how that was developed. I was about 7 years old when that was created. But in the early 90s, there was a cost containment committee that reduced across the board by 10% scholarship numbers. So you went from 13, 10% of 13 is 1.3. That's how you end up at 11.7. On the women's side, some of those reductions have been built back over time. But, you know, the golf used to be 5, then it was 4.5, 10% reduction. Men's basketball used to be 15, 10% reduction is 1.3, so you can't take away 0.3 of a scholarship in a head count sport, so it became 13.
Okay.
There's a history lesson.
Yeah, that's unique. But maybe we could get Dr. Andrews to talk about, arm fatigue and maybe attack the health standpoint and might be able to get that number up.
Well, keep in mind, though, there are a lot of young men on scholarship in baseball. It's just divided. And one of my concerns, putting aside, the college baseball model works for us right now. Let's not forget. I think that's us and weather and expectations. The notion of the back and forth on living room couches between parents and coaches around, 0.1% of a scholarship, I really wish there was a different way. And that's not something that I just wish, but it's not something I can just flip a switch and make change. I think it is a relevant question and a relevant conversation.
Well, thank you for the answer. Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the hospitality, and we're counting down the start until SEC football. 46 days and only 174 do we meet in Santa Clara to decide the champions.
Yeah, when I was in Tuscaloosa for the trophy presentation, I counted down the numbers for both the start of the season, our championship game, and Santa Clara. And somebody told me as I did that that Nick smiled because I was reminding his players that there is tomorrow.
Hey, absolutely. Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation.
Yep.